So before we begin, we would like to thank Karen Stevens and Judge Collins as well. And we wanted to introduce you to also Renee Lehman, who's our CEO, and she's sitting right there at the back. Hi, Renee. So today's presentation is going to be about how to become a trauma-informed attorney. So as an agency, Center for Child Counseling, we built
Before we get started,
we built a foundation for playful, helpful, and hopeful living for children, families, and communities. And we say playful because we actually specialize, we do a lot of play therapy with young kids. We believe that toys are their words and play is their language. Helpful because we believe in that prevention and education services, exactly what we're doing today in preventing work, right? So the children can get help before they get that mental health diagnosis. We want to prevent them, before they become adults. And hopeful because we believe there's hope in the world and we can be superheroes for these kiddos. And our vision is to build healthy, resilient children, families, and through ACEs-aware and trauma-informed communities. So right here on the screen, you'll see this beautiful circle. It's about a boy called Elio. And this perfectly pictures what we do at the Center for Child Counseling. So that's what we want to envision this community, this world to be. So when you see on the top, you see Elio. Here he is, a born baby. And what happens is he's born in a trauma-informed community. So everyone is aware about trauma, about ACEs, and how to handle people and children when they're experiencing trauma. But what happens is, he has a sister who becomes sick. Parents have to work extra jobs to make the money to, make everything go around. We see that a lot. But Elio is able to receive therapy and support at schools. Everyone is trauma-informed, teachers, doctors in the community. So you see Elio's growing up in this community. He has that support from different adults in his life. And when he grows up, he becomes actually an attorney to help other children. So that's our goal. We want to create that trauma-aware adults within our homes and communities. So those are our goals for today. We're gonna learn about what is trauma and the impact of trauma and toxic stress. We're also gonna learn about the ACE study and the outcomes of ACE study. We're also gonna learn about impact of early adversity on the lifelong health. And we'll go over the importance of creating trauma-informed community. So I'm Marie.
Thank you. So when you guys think about trauma, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Anything, throw it out.
Domestic violence.
Okay.
Negative. Scary.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So you guys have a good understanding of trauma, yeah? Sometimes courtrooms are traumatic for therapists.
For attorneys too.
So I want everybody to take a deep breath because this video is challenging to listen to. You don't have to watch anything, but it is difficult to listen to. So if everybody has a drink, grab it, chug. No, just kidding. But we're gonna play this, so take a deep breath and we're gonna process it and talk about it afterwards.
Standing emergency.
My mommy and Daddy are having a fight.
Is he hitting her?
I'm talking to the police, Mommy. Stop it! Stop it! My baby! Stop it! Could you just send the police, please?
Okay, we're going to be there. What's going on?
They're having a fight because this has been going on forever and ever. Oh my God!
What's the matter? Hello? Shit.
Because I don't know about you, but I've seen this video, I don't know, thousands of times, and I still hold my breath every time. So, deep breath. What came up for you guys? What did you notice? What did you notice in your body?
Anxiety.
Paralyzed. Yep. What emotions came up?
Sadness.
Anger.
So what do you think this little girl's feeling? Terror.
Well, I don't know what happened. Was she even alive?
You want to know what happened?
Well, I mean, we also don't know her age, so given her, that she was smaller, right? I mean, it was one thing if we're adults hearing it, could you imagine, given maybe her age, that would affect her ability, how she's processing it. Saying, oh boy, what a brave young girl.
Right?
Yeah.
And did you hear what she said?
Forever and ever.
Yes,
Yeah.
this has been going on forever and forever. So this is normal to her. This is what happens at home on a regular basis. Do you want to tell what happened?
Yes, actually Lisa, when she grew up, she also married a man who was abusive. But right now she is a speaker and she does trainings like this and presentations. She did realize, how trauma impacted her and her childhood. So that's her story. Do you think Lisa, when she goes to school, do you think she can focus on the schoolwork, on what teacher is trying to teach?
No,
What is she thinking about?
not wanting to go home.
Right, Warren is her mommy okay? Is her sister okay? Yeah. So can she focus? And what do teachers do? You're not listening, right? She has ADHD. She can focus. So we see so many children misdiagnosed with ADHD when in fact it's trauma.
Now think about this little girl in the courtroom. I want you to think about her as we continue going through the rest of this training and think about, I wonder how testifying in the courtroom has the potential to impact her. So let's talk about individual trauma. What is trauma? We talked about domestic violence, neglect, difficult situations, hard stuff that happens. But trauma is subjective, right? So we could all go through the same exact situation and we're gonna experience it differently. Some of us may experience symptoms of PTSD or acute stress disorder. Some of us may be like, whew, I'm glad that's over. I'm glad that's over. That was terrible and it's over now, I'm okay, right? Because trauma is subjective. But trauma overwhelms our capacity to cope. It is too much, we can't handle it. Trauma also threatens the life or the integrity of someone who is close to us or of ourselves. So if we think about the kids that we are working with, if their parents or caregivers or someone that they rely on for support, if that person is experiencing trauma, then that child also has the potential to be traumatized. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look at trauma. What happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you? What do you guys think about that? What happens inside you as a result of what happens to you? Think about a very young child whose parent or caregiver is struggling with substance use disorder or depression, postpartum depression. Is that parent or caregiver able to meet the needs of that child? Not consistently. No, so if that baby is laying in the crib, crying, and nobody comes to get him, what do you think he learns?
It's not safe.
The world's not safe. Nobody's gonna meet my needs. I guess I'll just stop crying because nobody's gonna come get me, nobody's picking me up. I'm not good enough.
I'm not lovable.
And he's gonna take that with him and carry that for the rest of his life. And other experiences can potentially really firm that belief up. If something else happens, yep, see, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, the world's not safe, nobody's there for me, I'm all on my own. And trauma disconnects us from ourselves. Have you ever known anybody or experienced your own trauma and you felt dissociated from it? I've worked with probably hundreds at this point of children who have experienced sexual abuse and trafficking. And one of the things that they all tell me is that they got real good at dissociation. They had to. They couldn't be there in their bodies to be present and be part of what was going on. So they used an adaptive coping skill that was life-saving. Later on, that adaptive life-saving coping skill has the potential to become maladaptive, because now they're dissociating all over the place. Maybe they're being called liars, maybe they're forgetting to do homework, they're saying they're gonna do something, they don't do it because they're dissociating. So when I have a gut feeling, I don't follow it. Have you ever had that experience? How many people do you think have experienced trauma, but they're like, I don't know, I don't trust myself. I'm just gonna go into this situation anyway. Any thoughts about this? Trauma disconnects us from ourselves. So we talked about how trauma is subjective, right? There's inside influences that play a role in whether or not we are traumatized. We carry with us our genetic factors and predispositions and intergenerational trauma and our unique physiology and psychology. It also depends on when we are traumatized or not, the people around us. So when I'm little, I am looking to my caregivers. How are you responding to this? How should I respond to this? You're calm, cool, collected? Okay. All is well with the world. It's okay. That was a scary situation, but we're okay. We got this. But if my caregiver is not okay, what is my response going to be as a young child? I'm not going to be okay either, right? I'm looking to my caregiver who's modeling that behavior that I'm going to learn that's become normal, that's going to become normalized for me. So talking more about the young child, kids also lack the cognitive ability to communicate and to really understand what is happening with them and verbalize that, right? How many kids have you guys interviewed or seen in the courtroom, talked to in any capacity, and they experience something difficult, but maybe they don't have the words for it? They really struggle to put that into words, what happened. They know that something scary happened, but maybe they also don't remember all of the details. Or how many people do you know who have experienced a trauma, but they don't see it as trauma? Because, well, this is what my family does. We get mad and we beat each other. We get mad and we throw people through walls, or we punch walls, or we drink, or we use drugs, or we run away, we leave the house. This is normal, this is what we do. It's not weird. You're weird. You don't do that? And the brain is still developing, right? Brains are not fully developed in our kiddos. So what is the damage that's potentially happening in the brain as a result of trauma? What do you guys think? I'm sure you have had some kids on the stand, or you've interviewed some kids. What kind of experiences have you had?
Trouble with resolving disputes.
Oh yeah. Hi.
Come on in, you're the way, please, come on in.
So late.
Stop it.
Hi, everyone.
Be nice.
Trying to be trauma informed.
We are talking about trauma, yes.
Yes.
So my favorite to work with, the kids that I love working with, are the ones that everybody's done with. Nobody wants to work with them. They are the teenagers who have they're involved with DCF, they've got the concurrent DJJ charges, they're in and out of the system, they're causing all kinds of havoc out in the group homes. I love those kids, those are my kids. And they come with all of these diagnoses. They've got conduct disorder, and intermittent explosive disorder, and ADHD, but they don't have a trauma diagnosis. They don't have PTSD. But if we compare the criteria for PTSD to all of these other diagnoses that they come with, they look pretty similar. So the older they get, they're still carrying all of these negative beliefs and these maladaptive cognitions about themselves and the world. You're not safe, you're gonna beat me up, so I'm gonna fight you first, right? I'm not okay. And then they get older. Feel free to jump in if you have anything to say. I could talk about this all day. I had a law enforcement training earlier today, and I only get an hour, sometimes an hour and 15 minutes with them. And it's so much fun because I get to help law enforcement be trauma informed. And sometimes they're like, yeah, okay, whatever, lady. But today they were really engaged. It was wonderful. I could talk forever. Go ahead. So what about the impact on adults? Have you ever experienced something challenging, something difficult?
No one's a law school, so yes.
Okay, so when you have experienced something challenging, what's your experience? Some people handle it a little bit better than others. Maybe we have shock. We're in disbelief. This can't be happening to me. Some people are a little more dramatic with it. Oh my God, my life is awful. The worst things always happen to me. This is terrible. Right? But maybe we're confused. We have difficulty concentrating. Maybe we're angry and we lash out at other people. Anxiety, fear, guilt, shame. And remember, we're adults. We have the capacity to verbalize this stuff. We have the capacity to understand what is going on, what we are going through, what we are experiencing. We may feel disconnected, numb, dissociative, sad, hopeless. Maybe we want to fight everybody around us because we're so angry, but then we don't want anybody near us. Just leave me alone, right? So we're going to take a look at this video on how trauma impacts the developing brain.
Because of the way the brain works, you will always remember your very first roller coaster ride. Storing these new experiences is one of the brain's main jobs. In fact, your brain creates a mental blueprint of every new experience you have. A blueprint for any new touch is stored in one part of the brain. A blueprint for any new sound in a different part. And a blueprint for any new sight in still another part. But as powerful as that first roller coaster ride was, it can't compete with the lingering effects of your brain's earliest experiences. Although you have no conscious memory of this part of your childhood, it is these very first experiences that literally become the building blocks for your whole life.
Unlike other organs, the brain is undeveloped at birth, and it is waiting for experiences to shape how it will develop. The amazing thing about the human brain is that the younger you are, the more sponge-like your brain is. Which is the reason that children in 3 years can learn language, can learn to walk, can do all kinds of incredible things. But the very same biological sponginess that allows us to rapidly acquire language is also the same sponginess that makes young children more vulnerable to trauma than older children.
We have the opportunity to do police ride-alongs to a domestic violence situation. And so this was actually the first call I ever rode along. It was dinner time, and they were having spaghetti for dinner. It was dripping down the walls. The kitchen table was overturned, and we had 3 children in the household. Looking at this whole situation at the time, we said, no evidence of physical harm, the kids are fine. We learned differently, of course. The boy in the corner was classic behavior that we see with kids who have had chronic exposure to violence. He would just completely zone out, numb out as things started to get scary. The 6-year-old little girl on the chair blames herself for what's going on, but actually it was 4 years later that we really appreciated who had some of the most profound or severe harm coming out of this situation, and that was the 6-month-old baby who was now 4.5 and had seriously injured another child in preschool.
It's literally the opposite of the way most people think about this. Most people think young children, they don't really understand what's going on and they're resilient. But the fact is, if anybody's impacted more severely, it's the younger child.
The brain is put together like building blocks in a sense. Those first blocks that go together are the more primitive area, the survival brain.
The brain develops from the bottom to the top and from the inside out, so that the normal development of the top part of the brain depends upon healthy development of lower parts of the brain. The top part of the brain, where you do all of your thinking, is the part of the brain that is most changeable, easiest to modify. But unfortunately, if a child has developmental experiences of threat and exposure to domestic violence, the lower parts of the brain will be impacted and they're harder to change as they get older.
What did you notice? Were you shocked to find out about the baby? Right? That's what we usually think, like babies don't remember. But it's the opposite. The younger they are, the more they remember. First 8 weeks are so crucial for development. I actually had a client just like that. She was 6 weeks old, she was removed from the home, there was domestic violence, drugs at home. She was never really picked up. She was 30 when they found her, she was malnourished. And then at the age of 4, she had severe problems. And her older sister, who was 1-year-old, she actually didn't experience the same symptoms as her. So that just shows you how, crucial the first weeks are. I remember he was talking about the core cognitions we all carry. These are the things we develop as babies, right? The thought about yourself, self-view, world view, and other people view. So what do you think this baby develops? I'm not important, I'm not lovable, right? Can't trust other people. So you see a lot of people, maybe you have clients who are not very easy to trust you, right? You might have difficulties, engaging with them. Yes, communication.
Is that where reactive attachment disorder starts at them that young?
Absolutely.
Would that be fair enough to say?
Absolutely. Attachment comes from, that first moment they come out of the womb. Actually, it's actually even pre-birth when you think about it. They're born, they're already able to recognize language, voices of different people, so yes. Think about moms who have postpartum disorders. That baby doesn't get that, right? That attention, that one-on-one. What do we see as well? Domestic violence, substance abuse. Yeah. So think about some clients you might have who maybe experienced some of these things. Did you have any clients like these kids? Maybe like the boy, kind of disconnected, dissociated? Did you have clients like this? I see some nodding, yeah? Okay. And I'm sure it's difficult, right, to engage them. Yes.
So now we're going to talk about stress, because not all stress is bad, right? So there is such, but it's not. There is such a thing as positive stress. You get that brief elevation of your heart rate, you're freaking out about something, maybe you've got an exam to study for, or court to prepare for, or a marriage, a divorce. Something is there's gonna be some positive outcome and you can get through it, right? So you've got temporary elevations of the stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, but you're gonna get through this. You've got this. There's gonna be some amazing outcome. Then we have tolerable stress. Now, this is harder stuff, right? But you're surrounded by buffers. You've got people who are there to help support you. It's gonna be okay, you can get through this. You've got that elevation of the heart rate, elevation of cortisol, adrenaline, but there are people who are there to support you. Now, the really bad stuff is that toxic stress. This is what we see with domestic violence, substance abuse, parental neglect, all of those things that are happening where there is no buffer there to alleviate the effects of that toxic stress. This is all of that bad stuff that's happening and has the potential to lead to disease, disability, and early death. You've got the elevated heart rate, elevated cortisol, elevated adrenaline, and you are in that state of fight, flight, or freeze. Think about that child in the video that we watched with the domestic violence. How do you think she's feeling on a regular basis? Because remember, she said this is going on forever and forever. So does she come home, she's like, hey, we're gonna have milk and cookies, like come on over to my house, we're gonna have fun. No, this child is existing in a state of stress. She's got elevated stress hormones. She's gonna struggle at school. She's gonna struggle with her friends. She's gonna struggle all around because of this stress that's happening to her.
The brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed.
So we have a child who has experienced this toxic stress, this ongoing trauma at home, and just because they're removed from that situation doesn't mean that all of a sudden immediately the stress hormones drop, it's all good, like, whoo, thank goodness you took me away from my biological family and my neighborhood and my grocery store and my school and my friends and my yard and my pets and everything I know. I'm great now, thanks. And even if they're not removed from the biological family, let's say dad gets arrested. Dad's a perpetrator, he gets arrested, he's no longer there. You're still not gonna have a sudden, whew, everything's fine, I'm all good now, right? But now let's send that kid to court. Let's have that kid testify. I can't tell you how many subpoenas I get from my clients and I'm like, no, how about you subpoena me instead? Because what do you think a subpoena is gonna do for that child? Absolutely. That's just gonna add more trauma and it's gonna build on it. And I understand sometimes that child is an amazing witness. They were there, they saw everything, they heard it all. They are like perfect for whatever is trying to be accomplished. And it is triggering and re-traumatizing. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So toxic stress, like we've talked about, happens when a child experiences frequent, prolonged, serious, difficult things that are happening with insufficient buffering. So people who are not there, like a grandparent, another caregiver who can say, you know what, this is not okay that this is happening. I am here for you. Let's get you to therapy. Let's fix this. Let's work on this. I am here for you. It's going to be okay. We can all go through difficult experiences, and if we have buffers in our life, we can handle it, right? And then there's lots of other factors that are going to determine our outcomes. So if we think about the impact on executive functioning, remember, in that video it talks about how the brain is built like building blocks. So from the bottom up, the brain is built. The last part of the brain to come online is that upper level executive thinking, like you are really able to function and manage your time, schedule appointments, sequence, get there, build relationships, like be a functioning human being, right? But toxic stress negatively impacts that. So it impacts all of these things in the circles that you see up here. Working memory, attachment, your ability to plan, sequencing, social flexibility. If you have that toxic stress and you have constant cortisol and adrenaline flowing through your body, you are not an easygoing person. You're not gonna be like, okay, the change of plans is happening, like, it's all good, let's do this. It's like, oh my God, this is not okay, like I had these plans and now I can't. You're stressed. You're constantly in that state of stress.
So can you think about any clients you have that forget things, maybe don't get to appointments on time? So as you're thinking, looking at them, that might give an idea of what might be happening with them. So I have a question. How many of you have heard about ACEs? Raise your hand. Okay, 3 people. 4. Okay. So those of you that do not, you're gonna learn about it now. So the whole study, the ACEs study started actually in 1985. There was a doctor in a clinic, obesity clinic in California, and he used to work with patients who were in the 300 pounds mark. They had a special diet, exercise program. They would lose their weight, but then what he noticed, they would put it back on. So after a while, it seems like everything was working, but they put the weight back on really rapidly, out of nowhere. And he said, what's happening? Why is this happening? Most of these patients were actually gaining weight after the program. So we started asking them questions, when did you start, eating, or did something happen in your life? And there was this one patient who said, I think I'm sleep eating. And he said, what is that? Well, I live alone. I wake up, my kitchen is a mess. Looks like someone was cooking in there, someone was eating, but I don't have a recollection of that. He said, okay, when did you notice that started happening? And she said, there was a man at my job, an older man, who said, hey, Patty, you lost all this weight. Why don't we meet? That was her trigger. So he started asking more questions, what about your childhood? How much did you weigh when you had your first sexual experience? And she said 40 pounds. What's the age, typical age of a 40-pound-old? 4 or 5-year-old? So she did disclose she was sexually abused by her grandfather. And with that, he became discovering more of his patients who would disclose some kind of sexual abuse or domestic violence or divorce in the family. But he said there was this other lady who she was actually raped as 20-year-old. So she put weight on right after that happened. And he said she looked down on the floor and she said, overweight is overlooked, and that's the way I need to be. So she felt secure. If she was overweight, no one could attack her. So he realized that obesity was not their problem, but it was an unconscious solution to their problem. And the problem was trauma, childhood trauma. So we started, doing this research. He had 355 patients in the clinic. And he noticed, when I start asking them questions about their past childhood trauma, the visits to ER go down. They disclose a lot of things. And they feel better when they just realize how the trauma could impact them. So he went to a conference in Atlanta. He presented his findings of 355 participants, and everyone laughed at him. People ridiculed him. They said, what? That's just their excuse to be obese. They don't have anything happening to them, But there was this man at his table, Dr. Robert Anda, who said, I believe, but we need a big study. We need proof, So they designed this study, and they collected the data between 1995 and 1997. So think about it, almost 30 years, but still a lot of people don't even know about ACEs. And they asked 17,400 people 10-question survey that we're gonna see in a little while. And they actually found correlation between childhood trauma and adult health outcomes. And what's interesting is as well, the participants were primarily white in their 50s, college educated, medically insured. So it's not just a certain zip code, certain population, it's everyone. We all, I'm sure in the room, you all maybe had some kind of trauma in your childhood. So here's the collaboration. That's Dr. Vincent Felitti, who was the first doctor of the obesity clinic, and that's Dr. Robert Anda. So the collaboration was between the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And that study resulted in over 70 scientific articles and was replicated in over 42 states and all over the world, actually. So the ACEs survey has 3 parts: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And those are the 10 questions. So the question is, have you, before the age of 18, have you experienced, and these are the questions, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, divorce, separation, domestic violence, substance abuse, mental illness in the family, and incarceration. So those are just the 10 original ACEs, the big T, the big trauma. When you see your clients just looking at this, maybe you might know their background. You might realize how many ACEs they may have. So the outcome of the study was that over 67% of people had at least one ACE. So it is very common. And if you have one ACE, there's 87% chance that you're gonna have two or more. And what's interesting is that the more ACEs you have, the greater the risk for chronic disease, mental illness, obesity, violence, being victim of violence. I will actually share my mother-in-law has 8 ACEs, so when you looked at that, she has 8 of those. She has 2 siblings. Both siblings suffer with substance abuse right now. She turned out okay, but she actually had cancer and 2 autoimmune disorders so far. So somehow that trauma did come out. And we see that a lot with our clients as well. And we're gonna play this great video now.
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? Yes! While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame. There is no shame.
I'm so good. Good to see you. How are you? Amen. Noel, good to see you. Welcome. I was abused as a young girl. I was beaten by my mother. I was verbally abused by my mother. I was sexually abused by another man. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was a rageaholic. I've driven drunk. I've sold drugs. I was a juvenile delinquent. Probably my story is similar to most of your stories in here. I'm white and I'm female and nothing happened to me. So, I got a get out of jail free card. And so I'm here now because I see myself in every one of you.
I'm a traumatized child, raised by a traumatized child. My mother was traumatized as well as her parents.
Like he said, we wasn't born in the world of being evil people. My mother didn't want me. She hid her pregnancy. and she tried to flush me down the toilet. But as I learned about these things, I always asked myself what was wrong with me.
When I come to the circle and I see everybody else and she's reading off the questions and people stepping in further, and I look at my childhood and I'm like, a lot of these people in this yard are just like me.
There was one step I should have taken that I didn't take, and I saw some of my brothers and my friends take that step, and I felt like such a coward. You know, I wasn't brave enough to be there with them when they took that step. And every round after that, I took the most difficult step.
Our traumas kept us separated. We were all on the circumference, all standing apart. But once we began to acknowledge our traumas publicly, it brought us all closer together.
In prison, you're not supposed to show your weaknesses in prison, though. But to want to do that, to walk in that circle like that, and to take each step forward was a reminder to ourselves that we still have a humanity and we worthy to be loved, though. Most people on the outside don't understand that we want to change so we can re-enter society better than what we left it.
And I think one of the things that when you was yelling at no shame and you had us yelling it out, it was freeing us too. And it was a point to where when I was looking at that and we was all looking at it in a circle, you can hear that echo, no shame. And that was very powerful, especially coming from a little lady like you.
I'm 76 years old. I've seen a lot. I don't like talking. I like to meet people that understand what's happening without words, and you one of them. Today has been one of the best days I had in my whole entire life since I've been out to these 40 years.
Your true spirits are not violent. Your true spirits are magnificent.
I think that's a very powerful video, right? And I have some exciting news. You guys are the first group I'm going to announce to. Fritzy Horseman, the lady from the video, she's going to be our guest on April 19th at our Lead the Fight event. So mark your calendars and we'll make sure to send your emails with the event information. So when we look at ACEs, we just learned about the 10 original ACEs, the big T trauma, but there's also other traumas that happens to us in the community or in the environment that may impact us. So apart from the 10 original ACEs, now there's a lot of studies that show there's more things that can impact you as a child, such as bullying in school, or racism, or discrimination, or poverty. Look at the environment. What do you see there? Pandemic. That was a big trauma we all had to go through as a community, right? But we were there for each other. So if you had that buffer, we say, someone there for you, right? That was the tolerable stress, but some people didn't have that. They had that on top of other trauma and toxic stress happening to them. So early adversity is linked to 10 leading causes of death in the United States. And here's the list. It's really striking when you think about it. Why do a lot of us don't even know about it? How there's a link between that? People who had 4 or more ACEs, so people who answered yes to those 10 questions, they also have more risk health behaviors, right? So there's a word likely, which doesn't mean it's absolute and they are going to be, but they're twice as likely to be smokers, 3 times more likely to have over 50 sexual intercourse partners, 7 times more likely to be alcoholic, 10 times more likely to abuse drugs, 12 times more likely to commit suicide. So when you think about it, here are the statistics. So when you look at a person who's an addict, don't think about why the addiction, but why the pain? Why are they doing this? And we'll talk about testifying in the courtroom concept now.
Thank you, Dawn, for all that helpful information. So let's talk about kids in the courtroom, because what does that look like? I see lots and lots of kids in the courtroom for lots of different reasons. So give me some examples of why you would have a kid come into the program. Anything.
Sometimes they're the person who's charged.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so then a child has to go to court if they're the one who's charged. Yeah, absolutely.
Oftentimes, if they're the only person that wants to witness the events, people will make the argument that that's necessary.
You're right.
In dependency cases, they're generally the victim of the abuse.
Exactly. But how often do kids get called into court? How often do kids get subpoenaed?
Independency? Independency, they're supposed to be there. They have
Yeah.
rights.
The statute says they're a party essentially, so they're, even if they're not subpoenaed, they have a right to be there.
But in family law, we don't, it's discouraged, it's very, yeah, it's discouraged and it's motions for that.
So think about sexual abuse cases, because I'll go back to that because that's my specialty. That's what I do. I do sexual abuse cases. How many kids do you think are survivors of sexual abuse and yet testify to subpoena against the person that hurt them?
Luckily, the number of kids actually go to trial is low, but many times they have to do depositions first.
Absolutely. Yeah. So think about a child who has been through all of this trauma that we're talking about. We have a brain that is not yet fully developed. We have toxic stress. We have that increase of hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. We have a child who is in a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze because of the trauma that they have experienced. And now they have to go to court for a deposition. How do you think they feel?
Not great.
Let's imagine all of you think of a difficult time in your life, maybe a trauma. Imagine going to a courtroom and facing it and explaining in front of a lot of strangers and people who may be innocent perpetrators.
Well, a lot of times it's a he said, she said too. Not that they're already on, but perpetrators and just come out and say, I did it. It's the child's word, it's the adult.
Yes. So I have two cases that I think have probably been the most, three that have been really the most striking in my career. One was a child who was sexually abused by a biological father. He used to drug her and all that fun stuff. And she got a subpoena. I tried to, get them to allow me to testify on her behalf instead. They decided that they wanted her to testify because she was older and able to handle it. She was 14. She was not able to handle it. What actually happened, because she did have to go through with the testimony, and I went there and I helped her practice deep breathing, and here's some lavender, and I'll sit outside the courtroom with you, and we got our therapy dog and all of this stuff. She absolutely collapsed at the deposition, fell apart. Long story short, she ended up getting kicked out of the foster home. She was transferred up north, got kicked out of that home, came back down here, completely fell apart, dropped out of school. Last I heard was a year and a half ago, and she had dropped out of school. She had gotten removed and kicked out of 6 foster homes, and she took off and ran. Nobody knew where she was. On the other hand, I had another child who was, she had immigrated from another country. Again, biological father had sexually abused her, gotten her pregnant. She had gone through that whole scenario. She went through the trauma of the abortion and all of those things that had happened. Hey, am I on your stage? We'll be done soon.
Well-dressed crowd, I'm not used to that.
So she ended up testifying, and I was allowed to go to court with her. And she had to testify about all of the things that her dad did in a courtroom with a jury. I was sitting there, her foster mom was sitting there, all of these people, and she had to tell the story about what happened when her dad did all of those things and got her pregnant and what happened. And the attorney for her father grilled her over and over and over. Are you sure you're not lying? She fell apart on the stand, sobbing hysterically. She had to be carried out by me and her foster mom out of the courtroom because she fell apart. But remember, she was old enough to handle it. She actually went on to do really, really well. I actually had a therapy session with her yesterday. She's a first-generation college student. She is doing amazingly well. She gave me a hug the week before she went off to college, and she was just like, I just want to thank Center for Child Counseling. You were like my second mom, and we love you. I love you so much. And she's like, it's because of you that I get to be here in college. So she was amazing, right? But so think about the impact that testifying or depositions or any type of courtroom setting has on a child. Courtrooms are scary. Attorneys are scary. Judges are really scary. But kids look at this and it's all very scary. There's a big person there, usually with a gun. That's scary. There's all of these people who are dressed up and looking at me and they're asking me all of these hard questions and what's gonna happen and I don't know what to say. And kids go back to that toxic stress. The adrenaline goes up, the cortisol goes up, they're in that fight, flight, or freeze. And you may have a kid who just sits there and they don't know what to say because they're so scared. They don't know what to do, they don't know what to say. Or maybe they just want to tell you whatever it is that you want to hear to make it all go away and make it stop. So we think about that and the potential for re-traumatization. Now there are some kids that I've worked with who are like, oh yeah, I want to testify, let me up there. I want to do this, I need to do this. Okay. If you feel like that is in your best interest and your parent, caregiver, foster parent, DCM, whatever that is, agrees, and your therapist feels like, all right, you've got this, and let's make sure you're prepped and you've got your coping skills. So courtrooms fall far short of being developmentally or trauma sensitive. Think about the courtroom. It's scary to a kid. The court process does not typically take into account the risks for testifying and child. Thank you. Yeah, I can talk about this forever. Sorry. All right, I'll move on. So, we want to shift our thinking to, instead of when we're looking at people, instead of what is wrong with you. Have you ever looked at somebody and you're like, something's broken up there, something's not quite right, what is wrong with this person? I've done it before, absolutely. But we want to shift that because there's always a reason that people exhibit the behavior that they have, right? So what happened to you instead? Research shows that you guys are buffers. We are buffers. Look, my ACE score growing up was a 9 out of 10. I had an amazing judge who was a buffer for me. I had law enforcement and an amazing attorney who were buffers for me because my family they weren't good buffers. So sometimes people need consequences and you guys have the opportunity to be absolutely incredible buffers and help people heal, regardless of their age, because adults also need buffers. Buffers help to heal the negative impacts of stress and help to build resilience. So here's what we can do. Just be aware. Ask yourself, I wonder what happened, instead of what went wrong with this person. Acknowledge that whatever their experiences are, and think, how has this affected you in your life? I wonder why they're exhibiting the behavior that they are. There's a reason for that. And remember that telling someone something terrible that happened to them is very difficult. And then still come out feeling like a human being afterwards.
Every 6 months, I'll get a letter in the mail.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I love that video. So, do you want to do this one?
Okay, so we're going to go quickly because we're kind of out of time. These are some of the things that you can address. Trauma, caring, suspending judgment. So instead of looking at people through that lens of what happened to them, why are they acting like this, thinking of why this behavior, right? What happened to them? What is their past? Accepting, so not judging, but accepting people as they are. Person focused, so being where they are, and listening to them. Because a lot of times we listen, to reply, not to understand. And reflecting. So when you ask a lot of questions, people shut down, they become more, resistant. Turning those questions into statements. So if instead of asking a question, you can say something. "Oh, it seems like you're upset. Seems like you're anxious." So just using these sentences helps people open up a little bit more. So what we want as a community, and because we do these trainings to schools, police officers, judges and courtrooms, we want trauma-informed schools. Every teacher should know about trauma. Unfortunately, no teachers know about ACEs. They don't teach ACEs in school, in colleges. Trauma-informed justice systems, communities, serving systems. That's why what you guys do is so important, and you being aware, coming today, thank you for that. And I wanted to share with you this ACEs toolkit. So if you want to learn more about ACEs, you can scan the QR code or go to our website, centerforchildcounseling.org, to learn more about ACEs and their research. And actually, we also have a free copy of a white paper. This is how to address the public health approach in Palm Beach County. So if you're interested, please, you can access it at no cost. So we want to strengthen the resilience while building a trauma-informed and ACE-aware community, so every child has a chance at a healthy future. And here's also our social media. If you want to follow us and learn more, feel free. Thank you so much.